Hey guys, so we just had our first YCS post-Duelist Nexus, so a huge congrats to Pac, Kamal as well as Ruben for their YCS win, and a big congrats to the rest of you in the top cut as well. So as usual, I wanted to provide a tier list based on data using Dueling Book data from YGScope, as well as some event topping information such as from regionals as well as YCS. I actually modified the formula a little bit this time around, actually taking into account both regional level event tops as well as YCS event tops, but just providing twice as much weight for the YCS event tops. And you can always check my older videos in terms of the details of how these tier scores are calculated. And so of course, before I continue, big thanks to my sponsors as well. Links and discount codes in the description below for Yu-Gi-Oh singles as well as supplies. Okay, so let's just get right into the tier list for this month, and we are going to start off with Kashtira. I get it, it's really boring to see this again. I know that it was not the most represented deck at the most recent YCS, but at the same time, if you kind of consider the overall number of tops, including regional level events, since Duelist Nexus, this by far has the most number of tops. Actually, it's still a very strong deck. After this ban list comes out, hopefully this month, it most likely will not be in this top spot anymore, but for now it is still doing rather well online, 58% win percentage as well, and as I mentioned, still a lot of number of tops. And then we have Purrely. This technically edged out Unchained in terms of the number 2 spot just because of the number of regional level tops. It did also top the YCS as well, a few tops, and so this is where I might have to start tinkering with the formula a little further, because maybe just providing twice as much weight for the YCS level event tops isn't enough. Maybe I have to give it a little bit higher weight to those YCS tops, but for now I think you can also respect Purrely as one of the best decks in the format, whether it's second best, third best, who cares. It's it's still one of the top decks that you have to account for. Some people have actually started playing Xyz Encore again in the side just to respect Purrely, but it can also kind of hit Kashtira as well. And then speaking of Unchained, this is definitely something that sort of came out, I don't want to say nowhere, but I think it did catch a lot of people by surprise. Probably a lot of people expected this to be just like a really good rogue contender, but now it's showing that, it really is very good. It's been topping a lot of regionals, and now it's had the most number of tops at the recent YCS, including, a lot of really high-level top-tier players running this deck and choosing it, showing that it really does have potential to do very well online. It's been doing absurd, in that 60% range, and I think it's going to continue to now get even more popularity now that it's shown that it can do well at a YCS level as well. Next we have Chimera, whether it's branded Chimera, probably for the most part branded Chimera. There might be some like Runic Chimera still running around. It's definitely gotten a lot of regional tops as well. It did get some tops at the most recent YCS as well, so definitely not some kind of fluke deck or anything. I actually recently did a survey of most of these decks, Purrely, Unchained, as well as branded Chimera, just so that you can learn some of the key strengths and weaknesses of this deck, so you can certainly go check it out. One of the kind of downsides that players mentioned about branded Chimera is that the line of play is rather linear, so it's a little bit easier to predict, but at the same time it has a lot of room for non-engine space, unlike branded Despia, for example. And if you actually play against this deck, you'll know that they can really quickly regenerate a lot of hand advantage too, which is always good in in terms of meta decks. Next, we're going to move on to Tier 2 with Labrynth, so definitely cannot sleep on this deck still. It actually did top the YCS again, and also, has a good number of regional level event tops. I think Labrynth has been sort of sneaking by the radar the last few weeks or so, because if you kind of rewind back for like at least a couple months, they were getting a lot of hate in terms of, Eradicator Virus, D-Barrier kind of thing. Of course, they're not exclusive to Labrynth, but, they were making the best out of those cards, but, who knows what will happen to those cards as well on the next ban list, and whether Labrynth gets any kind of direct hit at all. Probably not, but you know what, some people are predicting certain hits for Labrynth as well. Next we have Rescue Ace, another new deck, well, not really new, but at least became meta post-Duelist Nexus. Unfortunately, at the YCS, it did not seem like it made the top cut. At the same time, it actually has been picking up a lot of regional level tops lately, so I'm sure that will at least continue, and hopefully, who knows, we have like 3 more YCS events in September alone, so I'm sure we'll see this deck top at least in one of those events, and certainly really strong. I also did a survey of Rescue Ace players, and the set 4 mechanic being pretty interesting. Unfortunately, it does require like their Rescue Ace monsters to be on the field to be able to actually have those traps live, but it's definitely has a very strong grind game. So next we have Dragon Link, which you could argue should be actually scored higher than Rescue Ace, because it actually did have a couple of YCS tops, unlike Rescue Ace, but you know what, nonetheless, it actually is kind of another deck that might potentially be on the hot seat, not because it's doing absolutely amazing or anything, but just because it's been meta for very long. Will it dodge ban lists? Perhaps, but it probably might suffer some hits through the Bestials at least, because those cards supports are pretty insane, especially in Dragon Link, where it can not only serve as interruptions, but can actually serve as combo enablers as well. So, 57% win percentage online, this deck has been, for the most part, always really good for years and years, whether online or in IRL play. So definitely another deck worth considering in terms of banless hits. Next we have Spright, which has also been kind of under the radar lately. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that, like, for example, Runic, Live Twin, Spright, whatever, was really one of the best decks of the format. Post-Duelist Nexus has completely changed. Not as many people are running Spright, but at the same time, you are still constantly seeing tops with Spright, whether at regional level or now even at the YCS level. There were actually 2 Spright variants that did top as well, so also cannot sleep on them, but probably another deck that will inevitably get some kind of hit on the balance, as it has been in like 4 banless in a row. So next we have Branded Despia. So definitely has become now, ironically, the second best branded build, now that Branded Chimera is the one that's actually getting a lot of tops. Branded Despia is still solid. I mean, this is essentially a deck where, it kind of cannot really be tier 1, because if it does, then it's very easy to counter this deck in terms of siding strategies. I mean, even just Ash alone is very strong, but something like, let's say, Grave of the Super Ancient Organism, that is just complete FTK against Branded, that, people could easily side for the most part once this deck becomes tier 1. So I think tier 2 is kind of actually the spot where Branded Despia players alone would actually want. It is still quite strong. They do still have the gimmick Puppet Lock, which probably and hopefully will get banned just for the enjoyment of the game, but nonetheless, still cannot sleep on this deck either. Next we have Mannadium, which in a way is a deck that's definitely fallen off in terms of at least like pre-Dune expectations, because people expected this to be a tier 1 contender for sure, more so now tier 2, but you know what, it actually still did get a YCS top just this past weekend, and also multiple regional level tops, so you cannot sleep on them. I mean, people are probably still siding Droll, especially for scenarios like combo decks like Mannadium, for example, so they are still respecting it in that sense, so you know what, still a good contender. Now moving on to the Rogue tier, we are starting with Vanquish Soul, which technically I think also still belongs in tier 2 as well. Just scoring wise, I think it just kind of missed the cut. It did actually also have one YCS top this past weekend as well, so still pretty impressive. I am still seeing this a lot at regional level events. It's actually getting a good amount of regional level tops as well, so you can't sleep on them. They're actually going to get further support, I believe, in Age of Overlord as well. So you know what, the deck is only going to get better, so definitely keep them in mind. So next we have Tier Limits. I don't think it topped the YCS unfortunately, but it does have a decent amount of regional level tops at least. I mean, especially like Toronto Regionals, for example. I had that deck profile on my channel. Shout out to Yusuf. So it is still a really strong deck in my view. Of course, against something like Kashtira, it's probably not going to do very well against any kind of shifter-like strategies. But you know what? Its ability to just pop off in terms of the board presence it can make. It does have some back row interruptions as well. So still really strong. Cannot sleep on it. And who knows what happens with this, upcoming ban list. If let's say Kashtira, Bestials get hit like multiple times, then Tier Limits could potentially make a comeback as well. And then we also have Salamangreat, which is a deck, a rogue favorite. Has at one point was the best deck in the format, like 4 years ago essentially. So it did get some recent support. It is actually, doing pretty decent. For example, at Toronto Regionals, Matt actually finished 3rd place with Salamangreat. So it's definitely got potential to do well, at the very least at the regional level event. It did not top the YCS, but hey, again, we have like 3 more YCS events this month alone. Who knows? I'm sure maybe at least one Salamangreat player might sneak in there in terms of top cut. I think that would be very exciting for all the other Salamangreat players out there, because this is definitely something that sees a lot of play online usually, and definitely has a lot of fans, and I think it's a great deck to start for a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players. So next we have Infernoble Knight. Unfortunately, still kind of in that rogue status. I think, going into Duelist Nexus, a lot of people were very excited with the new support for Infernoble Knight. I think they still had pretty realistic expectations. I don't think anyone really expected them to be a tier 1 strategy, maybe tier 2. I think for now, it's shown to be kind of more at the rogue level. It's definitely getting some regional level tops here and there. No YCS tops so far, but again, who knows? I'm sure there will be at least like one Infernoble player that will also make it to the YCS level events in the next few events that are upcoming, and it is still doing quite well, at least online. 57% win percentage is actually pretty impressive. Next we have Marincess, definitely another kind of favorite online, at least. I always see this played a lot on Dueling Book, doing pretty well as well. And in terms of regional level events, getting some multiple tops there. Definitely had some YCS level tops, in the past half year or so. So I don't think it would be too surprising if we see that again. So I think it's a pretty cool strategy in terms of the type of board it can provide. It's not like the most intimidating kind of board, but they do play a lot of hand traps. They can also play that Marincess trap from hand, which is pretty busted in terms of providing a negate, but also protecting their own monsters. So I think it's also a pretty cool synergy with like Zealantis, like board wipe, and then just like not your opponent not being able to bring their monsters back. I think that's really cool interaction as well. Next we have Fluandrees, definitely fallen off a little bit in terms of play post Duelist Nexus. I mean, it is still kind of like a shifter deck, which, you know, can definitely do pretty well against most of the strategies in the meta. Again, with the balance coming up, if they do finally hit shifter, that will certainly make a dent on Fluandrees' strategy yet again. But, you know, they've shown the ability to adapt, for example, post Wind Barrier statue ban, and they were still able to do pretty well. You know, has been topping regionals still a little bit here and there. And again, online, this deck has always done really, really well, and so far still at around 58%. Next we have Mathmech. It's another deck that I personally believe will be a very, very good rogue deck at the very least for a long time. I mean, 57%, 1% for a rogue deck is actually quite impressive. It's a deck that can play a lot of hand traps, so it can always like hang in there if you, let's say, lose a die roll, whether, you know, and then going first or second. It can be very, very flexible, and it has also OTK lines, and, you know, going first, you know, multifactorial is always kind of nice, where you can just kind of like hand rep, send another card from the field, as well as having a sort of like an Omni Negate on top of that. It's always really, really strong, and again, if those Bestials do get hit on the balance, this deck can only get better. So next we have Sword Soul, you know, a deck that's kind of considered as solid as it can be, like really consistent. You know, its end board is not anything like super oppressive or anything, but it is, I can get there very consistently, and, you know, makes very good use of the synchro strategy. Usually has like a Baronne for an Omni Negate, you have like a Monster Negate and Chichao, and like 2 pops with the Blackout, so that's very standard. And you know what, I think it's pretty solid whether going first or second. You know, it's definitely fallen off, hasn't had that many regional level event tops, unfortunately, but you're probably gonna see a little bit more as we kind of move forward with this new format. And, you know, in terms of balance hits, I don't think there's anything really that you have to worry about if you're playing Sword Soul, so at least that's kind of nice. And then finally, moving on to the other category, unfortunately we have heroes that got kind of bumped down to this other category rather than rogue, but at the same time, you know, it's definitely been the most, like, one of the most consistent, like, reliable rogue decks in terms of history, because regardless of format, this deck always sees some form of play one way or another, whether online or IRL play. I've always talked about, you know, how good Dark Angel can be in this format. Let's say against something like Kashtira, they already, you know, struggle if you give them a monster, but on top of that, they also cannot use spells. Like, that is pretty good, especially against something like, also, let's say, any kind of branded variant as well as, you know, Purrely. They have a lot of spells in their deck, so really nice to have. DP, Pop, and Revival is always also very nice in a simplified game state as well, and this is another deck that can make use of Eradicator, which is always very strong. And finally, we have Altergeist, which is a deck that also got some buff from Duelist Nexus. I actually played against an Altergeist player at regionals recently, and the deck is actually quite solid. It can definitely be pretty impressive in terms of what it can set up, and it's like, I don't know, ability to grind, of course, as being kind of like a back row deck, but not really a floodgate deck as well. So that's always kind of nice. And so, you know what, it actually did top at least one regional level event that, you know, that's publicly known. So I think there's still potential for it to get some tops here and there. Now, there's of course, you know, some initial hype that you have to consider, you know, with this Duelist Nexus hype, but who knows, this deck has actually shown to be a pretty well played rogue deck throughout the last few years after its tier 1 status way long ago. Alright guys, so that was it for the tier list by the data for this month. So hopefully you found that interesting, and hopefully we do get this balance soon so that we can kind of shake up the meta again. And so anyways, a big thanks to all of you for watching. A huge thanks to my patrons as always for the continued support, and well, take care guys.